Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. Your shortcut to understanding some really complex stuff. And today, wow, we are tackling a big one. How do we possibly make sense of, wow, everything about human growth, all the choices, the different personalities, how people change over a lifetime?
It's a huge challenge, isn't it? I mean, think about it. You've got thousands, just mountains of observations. How a baby learns to talk, why teenagers do risky things, how older adults deal with loss.
Right, it's just data points everywhere, scattered.
Exactly. And without some kind of map, some framework, all those facts are just noise. It's confusing.
And that map, that's what we're calling developmental theory today. So our mission, our deep dive for this session, is to really get our heads around the main theories, the big ones, the grand theories, and also the newer ideas that try to weave all those observations together into a story that, well, makes sense.
A coherent story of human life, yeah. And maybe we should start right there, defining what we even mean by developmental theory.
Good idea. What is it?
Okay, so fundamentally, a theory here is a framework. It's a set of ideas, maybe some assumptions, some generalizations, and its job is to interpret and shed light on all those observations about how people grow and change.
So it organizes things, takes the chaos, and finds patterns.
Precisely. Its main purpose is organizational. It takes all those confusing facts and observations and arranges them into patterns we can actually recognize, see the connections, weaves the details into something meaningful.
And these theories, they aren't just abstract ideas sitting in a book, are they? They have real-world power.
Oh, absolutely. Profoundly practical. Theories, good theories anyway, they generate hypotheses, specific ideas you can actually test.
So you take them out into the real world or into the lab.
Right. And you run studies, you make discoveries, and here's the really cool part, the dynamic bit. Those discoveries, the new facts you find, they often push you to refine the theory, maybe even change it significantly.
So it's like a loop, a feedback loop.
Exactly. Facts lead you to build a theory. Then the theory helps you see new facts you might have missed before. It's constantly evolving.
Okay, so how are we going to tackle this huge landscape of theories today? How have you broken it down for us?
We've grouped them into a couple of major categories to make it manageable. We'll kick off with what are often called the grand theories.
Grand theories.
These are the big, comprehensive ones that have been around a while and try to explain a lot. Think psychodynamic, behaviorist, and cognitive theories.
Got it. Freud, Skinner, Piaget, those kinds of names.
Those are the key players, yes. Then, after we dig into those, we'll pivot to the newer theories. These tend to bring in more focus on social context and biology.
Like how culture shapes us, or our evolutionary history.
Exactly. We'll look closely at sociocultural theory and evolutionary theory there.
And you mentioned some other specific concepts, inspirations.
Yeah, before we wrap up, we want to touch on some really important specific ideas that developmentalists use all the time now. Things like humanism and frameworks that help understand aging, like selective optimization with compensation.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. And also socio-emotional selectivity theory. These aren't necessarily grand theories covering everything, but they're vital tools in the modern toolkit.
Sounds like a solid plan.
Yeah.
Where do we start with the grand theories?
Let's begin by looking inward at those powerful, often hidden internal conflicts that many believe shape who we are.
Okay, diving right in. Grand Theory 1, Psychodynamic Theory.
This is really the domain pioneered by Sigmund Freud and then significantly expanded by Erik Erikson. The core idea, the absolute heart of it, is that our adult personality, what motivates us, our values, it all has deep roots in our earliest experiences.
Often unconscious experiences right back in childhood.
Exactly. Things we're not even aware of, usually from way back. Freud's original psychoanalytic theory focused heavily on what he called psychosexual stages, 4 main ones in childhood.
And he had that famous model of personality, the id ego.
And superego, yes. That's probably his most enduring contribution to popular understanding, even if the details are debated. He saw our psyche as this constant battle.
Between
the id, that's the primitive, unconscious part demanding immediate gratification, all our basic biological urges.
Like hunger, aggression.
Right. Then there's the ego, which develops to deal with reality. It tries to mediate between the id's demands and the constraints of the real world.
The practical part.
Sort of, yeah. And finally, the superego. That's our conscience, the internalized rules and morals of society, often learned from parents.
So the theory is that development is about managing these conflicts.
That's the core of Freud's developmental view, yes. He thought personality was basically set by how we resolve the conflicts inherent in those early psychosexual stages, how the ego managed the id's demands under the watchful eye of the superego.
Can you give a quick example, like how that plays out?
Sure, imagine you're in a shop and you see something you really, really want, but you don't have the money. The id screams, "Take it, now!"
Okay. Impulse.
Then the ego kicks in, thinks practically, wait, can I actually afford this? Are there cameras? What are the consequences? It might check your wallet.
Reality check.
And then the superego weighs in, stealing is wrong. Good people don't do that. And hopefully you decide not to steal. That internal negotiation, Freud said, that's driven by how well you navigated childhood conflicts.
But the conversation didn't stop with Freud, did it? Erik Erikson came along.
Thank goodness, yes. Erikson's psychosocial theory took Freud's foundation but shifted the focus dramatically. It broadened the whole thing.
How so? What was his big change? He still had stages, right?
He did. He actually built 5 of his stages directly on Freud's childhood stages, but he added 3 crucial adult stages, making development lifelong. But the key difference, the really crucial shift, was the emphasis. Away from purely sexual urges as the main driver, Erikson emphasized family and culture, our social world, as the primary engine of development.
Ah, so not just internal biology, but our relationships in society.
Exactly. He proposed 8 developmental stages across the entire lifespan, and crucially, each stage wasn't centered on a psychosexual conflict, but on a challenging psychosocial crisis, a social challenge we need to resolve.
And you said he added adult stages. Freud kind of stopped things at adolescence, didn't he?
Pretty much. Erikson saw development continuing throughout life. His later stages are really important. Identity versus role confusion in adolescence, figuring out who you are.
A big one for teenagers.
Huge.
Right.
Then intimacy versus isolation in young adulthood, forming deep relationships. Generativity versus stagnation in middle age, contributing to the next generation through work or family. And finally, integrity versus despair in late adulthood, looking back on life with acceptance or regret.
So development becomes this lifelong journey of figuring out who we are in the context of our culture.
That's it, precisely. The crises we face, like feeling competent in school, industry versus inferiority, or finding meaning in middle age, generativity, they're driven by our interaction with our social environment, our culture.
Okay, so summing up psychodynamic theory. It looks at early, often unconscious experiences shaping us. Freud focused on sexual drives. Erikson broadened it to social and cultural challenges across the lifespan. But overall, it leans more towards nature, right? Because it emphasizes those internal drives, biological impulses, and the fundamental parent-child bond.
That's a fair assessment, yes. While Erikson brought in culture, the roots are still in those powerful internal forces and early relationships.
Okay, so if psychodynamic theory is about looking inside, what's next?
Next, we swing completely the other way. We look entirely outside, to a theory that basically said, forget the unconscious, forget internal states. We can't see them, we can't measure them.
Ah, this sounds like grand theory too. Behaviorism.
You got it. Also known as learning theory. Its core principle is simple. Focus only on what you can see and measure observable behavior, and figure out the laws and processes by which that behavior is learned.
No stages, no id or ego.
Nope, none of that. Just stimulus, response, learning.
So how does learning happen according to behaviorists?
The foundational idea is conditioning theory. The basic concept is that learning happens when responses get linked or associated with particular stimuli in the environment.
Okay, and this started with?
Well, the famous early work was by Ivan Pavlov, the Russian physiologist. Fun fact, he actually won his Nobel Prize in 1904 for studying digestion in dogs.
Not for the bells and salivating.
That came out of the digestion research. He discovered classical conditioning, sometimes called respondent conditioning. It's learning by association.
Like the dogs learning to associate the bell, which originally meant nothing, with food, which naturally makes them salivate.
Exactly. Eventually, the bell alone makes them salivate. A neutral stimulus becomes linked to a natural reflex. The dog isn't thinking about it, it's an automatic learned association.
Okay, so that's one type of conditioning. Who took this idea further?
In America, the big early figure was John Watson. He was quite forceful about it, argued scientists should only study what they could observe and measure directly. No introspection, no hypothesizing about mental states,
Just behavior.
just behavior. And he made some pretty radical claims. He proposed that basically anything could be learned through conditioning. He famously suggested, maybe a bit extremely,
What?
that if you gave him a dozen healthy infants, he could train them to become any type of specialist, doctor, lawyer, artist, even beggar or thief, purely by controlling their environment and conditioning.
Wow. That is the ultimate statement on nurture over nature, isn't it?
Absolutely. Total emphasis on the power of the environment. But the person who really took conditioning and applied it systematically to explain complex human actions was B.F. Skinner.
Skinner. Okay, he's famous for operant conditioning.
That's right. Operant conditioning, sometimes called instrumental conditioning. And this is fundamentally different from Pavlov's classical conditioning,
How so?
because operant conditioning focuses on voluntary actions and their consequences. Classical conditioning is about reflexes, involuntary responses. Operant conditioning is about behaviors we choose to do.
Like talking or working or pressing a lever in a box.
Exactly. The core idea is that behavior is shaped by what happens after you do it. If an action is followed by reinforcement, something pleasant, or the removal of something unpleasant, the probability of doing that action again goes up.
And if it's followed by punishment, something unpleasant, or the removal of something pleasant.
The probability goes down. The learner essentially operates on the environment, and the environmental response shapes future actions.
Okay, that distinction is clear. Voluntary actions versus involuntary reflexes.
Skinner agreed with Watson about studying observable behavior scientifically. His experiments are famous, like the Skinner box, where animals learn to press levers for food, but he also applied it to humans. The sources mention a really interesting, maybe slightly controversial example from his own life.
Oh, what was that?
He designed a special crib for his daughter, a glass-enclosed environment called the air crib.
An air crib. What was the point?
The idea was complete environmental control. Temperature, humidity, even the sounds and sights could be carefully managed. Skinner's goal, as described, was to make it optimally healthy, comfortable, enjoyable, and even educational for her.
Trying to prove his principles in raising his own child.
It seems so. It was like the ultimate statement. If you perfectly control the environment and the reinforcements, you can optimize development. Very behaviorist.
So the big takeaway from operant conditioning is the focus on consequences.
Yes, and crucially, behaviorists look at the effect of the consequence on future behavior, not the intention behind it. This leads to some really interesting and sometimes counterintuitive insights.
How do you mean? Give me an example.
Okay, think about school discipline. A child keeps disrupting the class. The teacher sends them out, maybe to the principal, maybe they get suspended. The intention is punishment to decrease the disruption.
Right. Makes sense.
But what if that child hates being in that classroom? What if getting sent out means they escape something stressful, or maybe they get one-on-one attention from the principal or a parent later?
Ah. So the consequence, suspension, might actually be reinforcing the disruption for that specific child, even though it's meant as punishment.
Exactly. The behaviorist asks, did the behavior increase or decrease? If it increased, it was reinforced regardless of intent.
Or flipping it, maybe the teacher keeps using suspension because their behavior sending the kid out is reinforced by the immediate peace and quiet in the classroom, even if it's not helping the child long term.
Precisely. You're thinking like a behaviorist. It's all about how the immediate environment shapes observable actions. This makes behaviorism the clearest example of a theory leaning heavily towards more nurture.
But wait. People learn complex things without getting a reward or punishment every single time, right? Like, I learned how to use this recording equipment partly by watching tutorials, not just trial and error.
Excellent point. And strict behaviorism, focusing only on direct conditioning, had trouble explaining that. It needed an update, an extension.
Which leads us to
Social learning theory. You can think of it as a bridge built off behaviorism. It acknowledges the core principles, but adds a crucial element: the massive influence other people have on our behavior.
how.
Primarily through observational learning and modeling. We learn by watching others.
So seeing someone else get rewarded or punished for something teaches us.
Yes, but it's more nuanced than that. We don't just mimic everything we see. The theory recognizes that people tend to copy some actions performed by some individuals, maybe people we admire, or see as similar to us and only in some contexts.
It's like a kid learning how to swing a baseball bat by watching a favorite player.
Perfect example. Or learning social norms by observing peers. And sometimes we learn what not to do by watching someone else face negative consequences. We might even intentionally do the opposite.
Okay, that adds a really important social and, dare I say, cognitive layer to behaviorism. We're observing, processing, deciding who to imitate.
It definitely moves in that direction, acknowledging that there's more going on inside than just stimulus response.
All right, so we've journeyed from the inner world of psychodynamic conflict to the outer world of observable behavior and learning through consequences and modeling. Where does our third grand theory take us?
It takes us squarely into the mind, away from just feelings or actions, and towards how we think.
This must be grand theory 3, cognitive theory.
Exactly. The core idea here is that our thoughts, our expectations, our mental framework schemas, assumptions, these profoundly affect everything. Our actions, our attitudes, our beliefs. Development, from this perspective, is all about changes in how people think over time. It's about the construction of knowledge.
And the giant in this field is Jean Piaget.
Without a doubt. Piaget, often called the stage master, proposed that cognitive development unfolds in 4 major age-related stages or periods. He believed we are active learners, constantly trying to make sense of our world.
And what drives that? Why do we bother developing more complex ways of thinking?
Piaget's driving force was the innate human desire to seek cognitive equilibrium.
Equilibrium, like balance.
Mental balance, yes.
Yeah.
We want our understanding of the world to make sense, to be consistent. When we encounter something new, a new experience or piece of information that doesn't fit with what we already know or believe.
Like seeing something totally unexpected.
Right. That creates a state of disequilibrium. It's confusing, maybe uncomfortable, and that feeling motivates us to adapt our thinking, to figure it out, to restore that sense of mental balance.
Okay, so disequilibrium pushes us to learn. How do we adjust our thinking? You mentioned 2 key processes.
Yes, 2 complementary mechanisms are central to Piaget's theory: assimilation and accommodation.
Assimilation and accommodation. Okay, break those down.
Assimilation is the easier one. It's when you take a new experience and try to fit it into the mental boxes, the schemas you already have.
So forcing the new information into an old category.
Pretty much. Piaget used the example of a young child who has a schema for dog, 4 legs, furry, tail. If they see a cat for the first time, they might point and say, dog. They are assimilating the cat into their existing dog schema.
Okay, makes sense. What about accommodation?
Accommodation is where the real cognitive growth happens. It's when the new experience doesn't fit the old schema, so you have to change the schema itself, or maybe even create a whole new one.
So the child is told, no, that's not a dog, it's a cat. See, it meows, it climbs differently.
Exactly. The child then has to accommodate this new information. They have to restructure their thinking, refine their dog schema, and maybe create a new cat schema. They adjust their mental structure to fit the reality. True learning involves accommodation.
Assimilation fits things in, accommodation changes the structure.
Got it.
And Piaget laid these out in stages.
Yes, his 4 stages are still incredibly influential, even though they've been critiqued and refined over the decades. They gave us the first real roadmap of how children's thinking seems to change qualitatively over time.
Let's walk through them. They're pretty foundational for anyone working with kids. Where does it start?
It starts at birth with the sensorimotor period, lasting until about age 2.
Sensorimotor, so senses and movement.
Exactly. Infants learn about the world through their physical actions and sensory input: touching, grabbing, tasting, seeing, hearing. Learning is very active, very hands-on, but without much reflection yet.
And the big achievement here is
The huge cognitive leap is developing object permanence.
the idea that things still exist even when you can't see them. Like peekaboo relies on the lack of it.
Precisely. Initially, for an infant, out of sight is literally out of mind. Developing object permanence is a massive step in understanding how the world works.
Okay, birth to 2. What's next?
Next up, from about age 2 to 6, is the pre-operational period.
Pre-operational. What defines this stage?
This is when symbolic thought really takes off. Language explodes, pretend play is huge, children become incredibly imaginative.
Sounds great. What's the pre part about? What can't they do yet?
Their thinking is still quite illogical in many ways, and importantly, it's highly egocentric.
Egocentric meaning selfish.
Not quite selfish in the moral sense, but literally self-centered. They genuinely struggle to see things from another person's physical or mental perspective. They assume everyone sees and thinks what they do.
Like a child hiding by covering their own eyes, thinking if they can't see you, you can't see them.
Classic example. That's pre-operational egocentrism.
Okay. Stage 2, ages 2 to 6. Then comes
The concrete operational period, roughly ages 6 to 11.
Concrete operational. What's the shift here?
Now, children can think logically, but primarily about concrete things, things they can see, touch, experience directly. They start to understand principles like conservation.
Conservation.
Yeah.
That's the thing with the glasses of water, right? Pouring water from a short, wide glass into a tall, thin one, and the child now understands the amount of water hasn't changed.
Exactly. They grasp that quantity remains the same despite changes in appearance. They also get much better at classification, sorting objects into categories, and understanding number concepts. They can solve real-world, hands-on problems logically.
But still limited to the concrete.
Yes, abstract thinking, hypothetical, reasoning, what-if scenarios, that's still really difficult for them.
Which brings us to the final stage.
Formal operational periods, starting around age 12 and continuing into adulthood.
Formal operational. What unlocks here?
The ability to think abstractly and hypothetically. Now, adolescents and adults can reason about things they haven't directly experienced. They can handle concepts like justice, infinity, complex scientific theories.
So they can use analysis, logic, on things beyond their immediate experience.
Right. This is when ethics, politics, philosophy, complex social issues become genuinely interesting and debatable because the mind has the tools to grapple with abstract possibilities and systematic reasoning.
Okay, that maps out Piaget's stages clearly. Sensoromotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational. And because the driver here is internal, that mental activity, the push for equilibrium cognitive theory leans more towards nature.
Generally, yes. Piaget emphasized the maturation of the brain and the child's intrinsic motivation to understand the world as key drivers, placing it more on the nature side of the spectrum, though experience, nurture, is obviously essential for providing the content to think about.
Now, cognitive science didn't just stop with Piaget, right? Things have evolved.
Oh, definitely. Piaget laid the groundwork, but newer approaches have built on and sometimes challenged his ideas. A major one is information processing theory.
Information processing sounds like computers.
That's the analogy. This theory emerged, influenced heavily by computer science initially, and now much more by neuroscience. It compares human thinking to how a computer analyzes data.
How does that work?
It breaks down thinking into smaller, more precise steps. You have sensory input, like typing on a keyboard, then internal processes like attention, connection making, accessing stored memories like RAM and hard drive, and finally output, like speech or action or what appears on the screen.
So it looks at the mechanics of thought. Memory, attention, processing speed.
Exactly. It allows researchers to study specific cognitive tasks like how we learn vocabulary, solve a math problem, or recognize a face in a very detailed step-by-step way. It's less about grand stages and more about the specific processes involved.
And you mentioned neuroscience. How does that fit in?
Information processing often integrates findings from modern neuroscience. We're not just talking about abstract mental processes anymore. We're looking at the actual biological underpinnings.
Like what's happening in the brain?
Precisely. Looking at neurotransmitters, hormones, even how things like digestion might affect mood and thinking. And crucially, we now have tools to actually see the brain in action.
The brain scanning techniques. I always see those acronyms. EEG, MRI, fMRI.
Right. It can seem like alphabet soup, but they give us incredible insights.
Can you quickly demystify a few? What do they show us?
Sure. EEG, electroencephalogram, and ERP, event-related potentials, measure the timing and location of electrical activity on the scalp, really good for seeing when the brain reacts.
Okay, timing.
MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, and DTI, diffusion tensor imaging, give us incredibly detailed pictures of the brain's structure, the gray matter, white matter pathways, like a high-res map.
Structure, got it.
And then techniques like fMRI, functional MRI, and PET, positron emission tomography, or FNIRS, functional near-infrared spectroscopy, these show brain activity. They track blood flow or oxygen use to see which parts of the brain are working harder during specific tasks or thoughts.
So we can see which regions light up when someone's thinking about language or recognizing faces or making a decision.
Exactly. It allows us to map functions to specific brain areas, trace connections, and study things like brain plasticity, the brain's amazing ability to change and reorganize itself in response to experience, things earlier theorists could only guess at.
That physical evidence must have a huge impact. Does it ever give us surprising results?
Absolutely. It can confirm theories, but it also challenges assumptions. The source material highlights a fascinating study related to this. They called it the dictator game study.
The dictator game. What's that?
It's a common setup in behavioral economics. One person, the dictator, though it sounds harsher than it is given a sum of money and decides how much, if any, to share with another anonymous person. It's used to measure altruism or fairness.
Okay. So what did this study look at?
They looked at perspective taking and generosity in participants ranging from age 7 up to 26. They wanted to see if, as people develop, moving through Piaget's later stages perhaps, they get better at understanding another person's perspective, and if that relates to how generously they behave in the dictator game.
And did it? Did perspective taking improve with age?
It did, pretty gradually and consistently, which fits with developmental expectations. And importantly, accuracy and understanding the other person's potential feelings or situation in the game strongly correlated with more pro-social behavior, both in the game, sharing more, and in self-reported helpfulness outside the lab.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. Better understanding leads to nicer behavior. What was the neuroscience angle?
This is where it gets really interesting. They used neurological measures, specifically looking at the thickness of the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain involved in higher-level thinking.
What do they find?
They found that the participants who were better at perspective taking and acted more pro-socially tended to have a thinner cortex in certain key brain regions associated with social cognition.
Wait, thinner, not thicker. That seems completely backwards. Don't we usually associate more brain power, more development with more density or thickness?
That's the common assumption, right? More is better. But this finding suggests that perhaps brain development involves not just growth, but also pruning and refinement. Maybe a more efficient, streamlined structure, thinner in the right places, is actually better for complex social understanding.
Wow, okay, that's a fascinating biological finding, linking brain structure directly to empathy and generosity. It really makes you think.
It absolutely does. And it forces us to question simple assumptions about brain development. It also serves as a great bridge as we shift gears now. We're moving away from those grand theories, which, let's face it, were mostly developed by European men over a century ago.
Good point. Science has become much more global and diverse since then.
Exactly. And that newer research, often incorporating global perspectives, cross-cultural findings, and led by a more diverse group of scientists, showed the need for theories that better accounted for the broader human context, the environment, the culture, our evolutionary past.
Which brings us to the newer theories. Where do we start here?
Let's begin with the profound impact of our social world. Newer Theory 1, Sociocultural Theory.
Sociocultural. So society and culture are front and center.
Absolutely. The core idea here is that human development isn't just happening inside the person, it's a result of the dynamic back and forth interaction between the developing person and their surrounding society, their culture. Culture isn't just background noise, it's fundamentally integral to how we develop and think.
And the key figure here is Vygotsky.
Lev Vygotsky, yes, a Russian psychologist whose work became hugely influential, especially in education. He focused intensely on that interplay between culture, social interaction, and learning.
What were his main concepts?
He talked about learning as an apprenticeship in thinking and guided participation.
Apprenticeship, like learning a craft from a master.
Exactly that idea. He saw cognitive development not as something a child does alone, like Piaget sometimes implied, but as a collaborative process. The child learns the skills, values, and knowledge of their culture by interacting with more knowledgeable members of that society, parents, teachers, peers.
So learning is fundamentally social.
Deeply social. And Vygotsky argued that the absolutely essential tool, the mediator in this whole process, is language.
Language? How so?
He saw words not just as labels for things, but as the very tools of thought. Language allows the mentor, the more knowledgeable person, to share information, explain concepts, guide the learner, and allows the learner to ask questions, internalize the guidance, and eventually regulate their own thinking using internal speech.
So language shapes how we think.
According to Vygotsky, yes. The language and concepts available in our culture literally structure our cognitive abilities.
That's a powerful idea. What about his most famous concept, the ZPD?
Ah, yes. The zone of proximal development. This is a brilliant idea.
What is the ZPD?
It's the sweet spot for learning. It represents all the skills, knowledge, concepts that a learner is close to understanding or mastering, but can't quite get there on their own yet. They need help.
So it's what they can do with assistance.
Exactly. Think about teaching a child to tie their shoes. There's stuff they can already do, maybe make the loop, stuff that's way too hard, maybe a complex double knot. And then there's the ZPD, the next step they could manage with your guidance, like crossing the loops correctly.
So effective teaching targets that zone.
Precisely. If you teach something they already know, there's no growth. If you teach something far beyond their ZPD, they just get frustrated and don't learn. The magic happens within that zone through what Vygotsky called the process of joint construction.
Joint construction.
Mentor and learner working together. The mentor provides scaffolding, just enough support, maybe demonstrating, asking leading questions, breaking down the task. The learner participates actively, asks questions, tries things out. Gradually, the mentor removes the scaffolding as the learner internalizes the skill or concept.
Like training wheels on a bike, gradually raised higher.
Perfect analogy. And because this whole process, the skills being taught, the language used, the interaction styles, is deeply embedded within a specific culture, sociocultural theory obviously emphasizes the environment. It leans strongly toward more nurture.
Okay, Vygotsky gives us culture, social interaction, language, the ZPD. What's our other newer theory?
Our final major theory takes a much longer view, looking back deep into our species' history. Newer theory, too. Evolutionary theory.
Evolutionary.
Yeah.
Like Darwin, applying evolutionary principles to human development.
Exactly. This theory aims to integrate biological explanations rooted in our evolutionary past to understand why humans develop certain traits, motivations, and behaviors.
What's the core premise?
It boils down to two fundamental biologically based drives that have shaped our species over millennia: survival and reproduction.
The ultimate goals of life, from a biological perspective.
Right. The theory suggests that many of our psychological traits, our tendencies, our developmental patterns evolved because they helped our ancestors survive and reproduce more effectively in their environments.
How does that work? Through natural selection.
Yes, through the concept of selective adaptation. The idea is that over long periods, genetic variations arise randomly. If a particular variation gives an individual, and eventually their offspring, an advantage in surviving and reproducing within a specific environment,
then that genetic variation is more likely to be passed on.
Exactly. Over many generations, those advantageous traits become more common in the population. The species adapts selectively to its environment.
Can you give some examples of how this explains human behavior or development?
Sure, it's particularly good at explaining seemingly irrational instincts or universal behaviors. Think about common fears, like the fear of snakes or spiders.
Yeah, why are people so much more afraid of those than, say, cars or electrical outlets, which are statistically way more dangerous today?
Evolutionary theory suggests these fears are ancient echoes. For much of human history, snakes and spiders were significant threats. Individuals who had a genetic predisposition to fear and avoid them were more likely to survive and reproduce. That fear got wired in. Our fear of cars hasn't had millions of years to evolve yet.
So our instincts lag behind modern dangers.
Often, yes. Another example is the powerful, almost universal impulse adults feel to protect and cherish infants.
The nurturing instinct.
Right. From an evolutionary standpoint, human infants are incredibly vulnerable for a long time. Species survival absolutely depended on adults having a strong, innate drive to care for them. Those who lacked that drive, well, their genes probably didn't get passed on as successfully.
So it explains deep-seated emotions and drives as survival mechanisms.
That's the core idea. Because it focuses on these ancient, biologically rooted drives and instincts necessary for species survival, evolutionary theory clearly falls on the more nature side of the debate. It's about the needs and impulses inherent in being human.
Okay, that gives us our 5 major theoretical perspectives: psychodynamic, behaviorism, cognitive, sociocultural, and evolutionary. That's a lot of ground covered.
It is. And before we try to pull it all together, maybe we should quickly touch on those specific concepts you called inspirations earlier. The ones developmentalists often use alongside these big theories.
Good idea. What were they again? Humanism was one?
Yes, humanism. This isn't really a formal developmental theory with stages like Piaget's, but more of a philosophical perspective that has influenced psychology. Key figures are Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers.
And their focus was?
On the potential for human goodness. They emphasize that all people share the same basic needs: physiological, safety, love, esteem, and possess an inherent drive towards growth and self-actualization, becoming the best version of themselves.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Exactly. It's a much more optimistic view of human nature compared to, say, Freud's focus on conflict. Humanism sees people as active agents striving for meaning and fulfillment, not just puppets of unconscious drives or environmental conditioning.
So it adds a focus on positive potential and meaning. What were the other two? They were related to aging.
Yes, two very useful frameworks for understanding development in later life. The first is selective optimization with compensation, often just called SOC.
Selective optimization with compensation. Okay, what's the idea?
It's a really practical model explaining how people can maintain high levels of functioning and well-being even as they face age-related declines in physical or cognitive abilities.
How do they do it? By being strategic.
Precisely. It involves three interconnected strategies.
As resources decline, people select fewer, more important goals or activities to focus on. They prioritize.
Okay, narrow the focus.
Second, optimization. They then optimize their performance in those selected areas by investing more effort, time, or practice. They work smarter and harder on what matters most.
Get really good at the chosen things.
And third, compensation. When losses or limitations make tasks difficult, they compensate by finding alternative ways to achieve their goals, maybe using external aids, different techniques, or relying on others.
Can you give that pianist example again? I thought that was really clear.
Sure. An aging concert pianist might select a smaller repertoire of pieces they can still play well. They optimize by practicing those pieces much more diligently. And they might compensate for slower finger speed by playing the sections before a fast passage extra slowly, making the fast part seem faster by contrast.
Ah, clever. So they adapt strategically to maintain mastery. That's SOC. What was the last one?
The final inspiration is socio-emotional selectivity theory, or SST. This one addresses why social relationships and emotional experiences often seem to change, sometimes for the better, in later life.
How does it explain that? Older adults often seem happier, more focused on close relationships.
SST proposes that the key factor is our perception of time. How much time we believe we have left in life influences our goals.
How so?
When time is perceived as open-ended, expansive, like when you're young, people tend to prioritize goals focused on the future. Acquiring knowledge, building career skills, meeting lots of new people, expanding horizons. You might tolerate some unpleasant social interactions if they could pay off later.
Makes sense. Preparing for a long future.
But when time is perceived as limited, as often happens in older age, or even in younger people facing life-limiting illness, goals shift. The priority becomes maximizing present moment emotional well-being.
Focus on feeling good now.
Right. So older adults often become more selective about their social partners. They tend to prune peripheral relationships, avoid conflict, and focus their energy on emotionally meaningful connections, close family, longtime friends that provide positive emotional experiences. They select interactions that enhance well-being now.
So it's not necessarily withdrawal, but a strategic shift in social goals based on time perspective.
Exactly. It explains that shift towards prioritizing emotional quality in relationships.
Okay, humanism, SOC, SST. Really useful additional lenses. Now let's try to bring all five major theories together. How can we synthesize them?
Well, we could do a quick recap of their main focus, maybe like a quick comparison table in our minds.
Good idea. Psychodynamic theory.
Focuses on those psychosexual or psychosocial stages, sees us as driven by unconscious impulses, resolving crises to form an identity. Think internal conflict and early experiences.
Behaviorism, including social learning.
All about learning through conditioning, stimulus, response, reinforcement, punishment, and modeling. Focus is on observable behavior shaped by the environment.
Cognitive theory.
Focuses on thought processes, how we think, remember, analyze. Seeking equilibrium, constructing knowledge through assimilation and accommodation, often in stages like Piaget's, or through information processing.
Sociocultural theory.
Emphasizes social interaction, culture, and language. Learning as an apprenticeship within a cultural context, guided participation, the ZPD. Development happens through society.
And finally, evolutionary theory.
Focuses on those deep, ancient biological drives, survival and reproduction. Explains behavior patterns as evolved adaptations that helped our ancestors thrive.
That lines them up well. And it also highlights that core tension we kept mentioning, the nature versus nurture debate.
Definitely. We can almost sort the theories along that spectrum.
Which ones lean more towards nature, the internal biological side?
I'd place psychodynamic theory there, with its emphasis on biological impulses and early bonds. Also cognitive theory, especially Piaget's view of inherent mental motivation and brain maturation. And clearly evolutionary theory, rooted in genetic inheritance and survival instincts.
Okay. And leaning more towards nurture, the environmental experiential side.
Behaviorism is the prime example, focusing almost entirely on the direct environment. And sociocultural theory, emphasizing learning through cultural interaction and mentorship.
So no single theory has the whole picture, does it? Nature and nurture are both obviously crucial.
Absolutely. And that's the reality. No single theory can possibly explain the staggering complexity of human development across the entire lifespan, across all cultures, across all domains. Which leads us to how most developmentalists actually work today,
Which is
using the eclectic perspective.
eclectic, meaning they pick and choose.
Essentially, yes. It means not rigidly adhering to just one theory, but instead selecting and applying aspects from various theories, depending on the specific question or situation being examined, using the best tool for the job, so to speak.
Can you give an example of how that might work in practice?
Sure. Imagine you're trying to understand why a 4-year-old is having frequent, intense tantrums.
Okay.
An eclectic approach might draw on several theories. From behaviorism, you might look at what happens immediately before and after the tantrum or certain triggers present. Is the tantrum inadvertently being reinforced by getting attention or avoiding a task? You'd focus on managing the observable behavior and its consequences.
Makes sense. What else?
From Erikson's psychosocial theory, you might consider the child's developmental stage. 4-year-olds are often grappling with initiative versus guilt. Are the tantrums related to frustration about wanting independence but facing limits? Is there an underlying struggle with self-control?
Looking at the internal psychosocial crisis.
Right. And from cognitive theory, specifically Piaget, you'd remember their pre-operational thinking. They're still egocentric, struggle with logic, and have difficulty regulating strong emotions. Understanding their cognitive limitations helps frame the behavior.
And maybe Vygotsky.
You could even bring in Vygotsky by thinking about language. Does the child have the words to express their frustration? Maybe part of the solution involves helping them develop the language skills, a cultural tool, to communicate their needs more effectively with guidance.
So you're using insights from multiple theories to get a richer, more complete picture of that one behavior.
Exactly. The eclectic approach helps guard against the biases inherent in any single viewpoint. It encourages open-mindedness and acknowledges that human life is just too complex for one framework to capture it all. It forces us to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously.
That seems like a much more realistic and useful way to approach understanding people.
I think most developmentalists would agree.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then. We've journeyed through these major frameworks. We saw the historical shift, didn't we? From Freud's focus on hidden internal drives,
To Skinner's insistence on only observable external learning,
then Piaget mapping out the architecture of thought itself, unfolding in stages.
followed by Vygotsky bringing culture and social interaction right into the heart of how we learn and think.
And finally, evolutionary theory reminding us of the deep biological imperatives shaped over millennia.
It's quite a journey through different ways of seeing human development.
And understanding these different frameworks, these different lenses, really gives you, the listener, the intellectual tools to better interpret behavior, your own, your children's, anyone's really, and make more sense of how people change and grow throughout life.
Hopefully it provides a map, even if the territory remains incredibly rich and complex.
Now, as we always like to do, let's end with a provocative thought. Something to chew on that connects these ideas maybe in a challenging way.
Okay. We talked about that dictator game study and the surprising neuroscience finding. Remember that a thinner cortex in certain brain areas correlated with better perspective taking and more pro-social, generous behavior.
Right. The counterintuitive biological finding. Thinner was better for empathy, essentially.
Exactly. A hard biological measure linked to a complex social-emotional skill. So here's the provocation. Given that biological result, what does it imply for the strongly nurture-focused claims of Vygotsky's sociocultural theory?
How do you mean? Vygotsky emphasized learning perspective-taking through interaction, right?
Right. Vygotsky argued that these sophisticated social skills, understanding others' minds, seeing their perspective, are primarily learned, constructed through social interaction, language, mentorship, cultural tools. It's all about the nurture side.
So the challenge is,
can a biological difference in brain structure, like cortex thickness, actually predispose someone to be better at learning and utilizing those cultural tools for perspective taking? Does the neuroscience findings suggest that maybe the capacity for empathy and understanding others has a stronger innate biological component, nature, than Vygotsky's theory fully acknowledged?
or does the culture and the learning actually shape the brain structure itself, leading to that thinning through pruning and efficiency?
That's the question, isn't it? Can we really separate the biological hardware from the sociocultural software? Or are they interacting in ways that blur that nature-nurture line much more profoundly than these theories sometimes suggest? Does effective cultural learning require certain biological predispositions, or does the learning itself sculpt the biology?
A really deep question about that constant interplay. Something fascinating to think about as you observe the incredibly complex ways people understand and interact with each other in your own life.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this complex theoretical landscape today.
It was my pleasure. We really hope this framework proves useful for everyone listening as you continue to explore human development.